Trumpcare is down and presumably out, at least for the count. And in the meantime, progressives and the opposition are looking to a new target, not just preserving the Affordable Care Act, but more than that. Here to talk about that with us now is our good friend, Nancy Altman. Nancy is the chair of the board at the Pension Rights Center, and she is the president of Social Security Works. She has also been writing and talking about this subject, and the comments that she had recently the commentary was entitled "The Best Response to Trumpcare's Defeat, Expand Medicare." So Nancy, first of all, thanks for coming back on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
So this, of course, is immediately where I went, but when Trumpcare went down, is okay, now it's time to really talk about a target that everybody can get excited about, but or everybody on our side of the fence, but tell me your thinking.
Well, not just on our side of the fence. You know, Medicare was supposed to be a first step towards Medicare for all. Now, the Democrats in some ways lost their way, and with Hillary Care during the beginning of the Clinton administration, and then with Obamacare, both President Clinton and President Obama chose to go to a marketplace solution, which is no solution at all, but it is really something to woo over Republicans because they always think the private sector can do everything best. The irony is they received no Republican support and really came up with a second-best proposal. Obamacare is much better than what we had prior to it, but it is not as good as simply extending Medicare, which is what every other industrialized country essentially has.
Yeah, I think that's very well said, and thank you for the reminder on the history. I do have to say my perception is that some Democrats, including the Clintons, at least in the 90s, and Obama, that their choice of health strategy was not just tactical, but to me it also seemed ideological, that there is a faction of the Democratic Party that at least for some period of time believed that private sector solutions were feasible and superior in the social insurance area. Maybe I'm wrong, but...
to be crass, if they were listening to their donors, you know, Big Pharma and the insurance industry, then sure, I agree with you. But if they're looking at pure policy, what the ideologues never want to admit, but what the American people understand, is that there are certain functions the government does better than the private sector. After all the government is all of us cooperating. So Social Security, a program where it's universal, we all pay in and we all take out when we have when we bear risks and responsibilities, is more efficient than its private sector alternatives. And Medicare, even though it covers people all the way up to 114, the oldest people in the population, about 2 million people over 90 are covered under Medicare. And it covers people with disabilities, those who have the largest health care expenses. And yet, Medicare is much more efficient than its private sector health care. It can be, you know, about 1.4% for administrative costs versus about 20%, $1 out of $5 for profits and overhead in private insurance. And part of the answer is profits, that the government is in there working for all of us. So there are no profits, there are no high-paid CEOs, there's no big fancy advertising. All of those things just drain money away and aren't paying for the health care we want and we deserve.
There are also economies of scale. There is,
absolutely,
you know, there are a million reasons why it works. You know, what I was thinking.
In fact, you could say there are 55 million reasons because the efficiencies of scale is a huge one. And of course, the federal government is the one entity that can require all of us to participate. It can cover everyone. It can cover everyone before adverse, you know, before for Social Security, wage insurance the minute you start working. Medicare, you start contributing while you're working, and you collect when you're 65. So you're exactly right. The efficiencies of scale no insurance company can match 55 million people, and if it were the whole country, it'd be 300 more million people.
And, when the Affordable Care Act was passed, we had the Franken Amendment, I think it was, that limited profitability or the profit ratio to something like 15% of total premiums. Hey, you want to cut your premiums by 15%? I can tell you how. And that's if they're abiding by the rule. I found 5 ways, coming out of that industry myself, I found 5 ways you could cheat that. But that's another conversation. And, Nancy, while we were talking, what occurred to me was that we have all this, some of the centrist Democrats used to do this too. Now we have Trump saying, well, let's take some of the best practices from business. Well, here's what we used to do when I was in the corporate world and I had, hundreds of different local regional offices working for me. If 5 of those offices operated more efficiently than all the others, we go there and we'd say, what are you doing differently? Because we want everybody to do that. If every developed country on earth is providing better health care coverage at substantially lower cost per person than the United States, then the business thing to do is say, what are they doing differently? And what they're doing differently is a government-run health care system.
Absolutely. And so I do think this is the correct response. It really should have been the response. In 1965, Medicare was enacted and people age 65 and over were covered. 1972, under President Nixon, people with disabilities were covered. And it should have just gone on. They thought, the architects thought, soon there would be a Medikids or a kiddie care where children up to a certain age would be covered universally, and then you just begin, and really essentially private insurance either competes, which it wouldn't be able to, or it withers on the vine. And that was the vision, but it got derailed because conservatives certainly didn't want that, and the place of least resistance was Medicaid. They were not crazy about means-tested programs, but they thought those were better than these universal programs. So Medicaid expanded, Medicare did not. Now is the time. We've now expanded Medicaid, which is good, and it seems, at least for the moment, it still is going to get attacked, but at least for the moment, with Trumpcare dead, it's safe for a moment. And what Democrats should do is defend the Medicaid expansion and start to expand Medicare. And there are ways it can be done in one fell swoop, but that's obviously hard. But there are ways that certainly make sense. Age 62, you can start receiving Social Security, but you can't get Medicare. And how can you retire without health insurance?
Right.
So, and at age 50, there was all the talk about the age tax. One of the reasons AARP was against Trumpcare. Well, there's an age tax in Obamacare. It's not as severe as the Trumpcare age tax or the age tax that existed before Obamacare. But if you cover everyone from 50 and older in Medicare, there would be no age tax. It's crazy that a 64-year-old pays more for private health insurance under Obamacare than a 99-year-old pays for her Medicare.
Yeah, and to me, this was one of the unsolvable issues with trying to do it the Republican way or the private sector way. There was never going to be a good answer to the question, how do you handle the age issue in a private sector plan? Because either older people are going to have to pay more. I think it was 3 times was the maximum, which is a lot.
That is under Obamacare.
Under Obamacare, and I think
it
was 5 times under the Trumpcare plan. But even 3 times is a lot. And either it was going to be that way, or you were going to be making younger people subsidize the premium costs of older people and the healthier and so on, which to a certain extent is insurance, but with the profits going to the private sector, it was always going to be messy. That's my point.
Well, the interesting, if I can, I don't mean to interrupt you, but the interesting point, it's like the old joke about someone who walks from one room to the other room and everybody's IQ goes up. I mean, it's the idea that if you take a 55-year-old who could be perfectly healthy and put that person in Medicare, it lowers the cost of Medicare per capita because the healthier person than even the healthy 65-year-old. But the least healthy in the private sector, because there you've got the 20, 30-year-olds, 40-year-olds. So by taking the oldest part, we've already done the hardest part. Medicare covers the most expensive, the hardest to insure part of the population, the people who use the most health care. If you begin to then just lower the age, as I say, the age 50, you lower private health care per capita costs and you lower Medicare's per capita costs, so everyone comes out a winner.
Yeah, and to me, there's something else from a practical point of view that makes absolute sense. But going back to first principles, I mean, that to me, that is a common sense, immediate solution, A. And B, it's a transitional step to Medicare for everybody. But the fundamental principle to me, and this is where the politics as well as the economics of it, I think, comes into play, it gets the Democrats back into the business of standing for something.
Yes.
And not making you an offer you can't understand.
You can't understand, and also not just, we don't like, the other guy's worse than we are. I mean, that's not a very inspiring message.
Right.
And in fact, it's, I know that Secretary Clinton almost won, and who knows with the Russian meddling and Comey and all of that. But the message of the Clinton campaign was, we're not as bad as Trump. And although I certainly agreed with that, it's not a reason to go out and vote.
No, it's not.
Bernie Sanders, who, as you knew very well, here you've got someone who on paper should never have gone anywhere, a 71-year-old socialist with a Brooklyn accent and so forth.
74, but who's counting?
74,
yeah,
but who's counting? But the point is, he had a message that inspired people. He ran on Medicare for all. He ran on free college, which makes sense. We have free high school. Why shouldn't we have free college? So I think you're exactly right. The Democrats have to return to their roots and an inspiring message. And what makes sense for all of us is health insurance that is affordable, that covers what we need covering, that doesn't have an enormous amount of paperwork. And I mean, trying to figure out what kind of health insurance to have, what kind of drugs you might be using 3 years from now, who can tell? You don't know what your health costs are going to be if you're healthy now, what it's going to be tomorrow. So it certainly makes sense to have, as you say, what every other industrialized country has, health care as a right that goes to everyone at a price that is, the burden is fairly borne by the entire population, and we wind up with better health outcomes because people don't resist going to the doctor because they know it's not going to cost them if they do.
And by the way, if I ever become dictator of the left, one of my first edicts is going to be no more use of neoliberal framings like shared responsibility or skin in the game. They are banned. They are forbidden. And then from now on, you want skin in the game, pay your taxes. That's how you get skin in the game, progressive taxation. And, so an ultimate vision that says we're all in this together on an affirmative sense that says we're all in this together. We take care of each other. We put in what we can. We pay our taxes. We do our best to be productive members of society. And if we're not able to pay our taxes, a society will help us get a leg up and all that. But we contribute and our human rights are met, and healthcare is a human right.
Exactly. And I'm so glad you just said what you said, because I find skin in the game not only offensive, but morally repugnant. You're talking about people's lives. You're talking about people who may have heart attacks or cancer. The idea, of course, the idea of, it's so callous to say, sort of this idea that some people, if they don't go bankrupt paying for the health care they need, that somehow they're going to abuse it. It's like everybody wants to go to the doctor and have tests. It's just like crazy thinking. It's only something an economist, I think, could come up with as somehow something. Oh, it's free. Somebody's going to take too much of it. People
Like the
do not want
free
to go to
rider.
their doctors if they can avoid it.
Yeah, like the free rider problem. I'm going to ban that too.
Good.
That free. Okay, well, unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there. But, once again, Nancy, we are in exactly the same place on this, which is it's time to stand for something. It's time to make an affirmative declaration for the country as a community government, as a positive force in people's lives that can do some things better. And regardless of what the interim steps are going to be, we believe that everybody should have health care.
And if I could just add one last thing,
Please.
that is, it would be the height of ironies in history, but I would love it if Trump getting elected and pushing Trumpcare, which then blew up in his face, wound up in the end bringing Medicare for all.
You know what? Stranger things have happened. So, unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there. But Nancy Altman, president of Social Security Works and good friend of our program, as always, great to talk to you, and thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you so much.